What is something that you're learning these days in your research? Is there some new tidbit that you can share with us?
Sure. Well, I'll give you a sneak peek on something we'll be releasing later this year related to the unchurched. And what we're learning is that there's this growing chasm between, the unchurched and the church.
Hmm.
And so, since we've been in business for 30 years, we have the opportunity of comparing data from, the 90s and sometimes in the 80s and throughout the 90s and the early 2000s. And so, as we compare some of the polling that we've done, and this is just really not just surprising, but it's been really like I've been really ruminating. Okay, how do we describe this? How do we help leaders understand this gap? But I would say that the unchurched have a growing calcification towards the church, towards the things of God, towards Christianity in general. And of course, in this book called Unchristian, we talked about the growing hostility that people have, younger generations. I'd actually I'd actually put some sort of nuance to that and say that I think that the primary issue that we're going to face over the next 10 years is growing indifference.
Hmm.
It's not so much anger. It's not so much, you Christians are judgmental and hypocritical. It's like, so what? Why
Hmm.
should I care? And so I think this growing indifference, they're less likely now than ever to want to be invited by a friend to their church.
Wow.
They're less likely than ever to have any interest in sort of non-church service ways of outreach. They're less likely than ever to have some sort of perspective about Christianity and its story. And so I think the big challenge for church leaders is, and for evangelists, is how do we really think about, working in a different kind of culture, a different culture than the one we've seen over the last 50 years here in America.
Would you say how similar would that be to what Western European Christians maybe have been living with for the last few decades? I mean, I'm not sure you've done research on that, but would you have a sense of it?
Yeah, I think we could take some real important, cues as to what might be down the road for us as American Christians from many other countries in the West. At the same time, I think it's simplistic for us to say that we're just going to follow the path of Europe. And there's a couple things that lead me to this. There's a really good book called American Grace by a sociologist by the name of Robert Putnam,
Yes.
and he talks about it's a long book, a lot of great research, really involved, and he comes out of Harvard, and he talks about if you plot a country's affluence along one axis, and then you plot their spirituality along another axis, and you find that in general the less affluent the country, the more spirituality they have,
Hmm.
and the more affluence they have, the less spirituality they have. So, in Europe, generally fairly affluent, developed countries, they generally have very low spirituality, as opposed to countries in Latin America or in Africa or Southeast Asia, very low affluence and very high levels of spirituality. And he makes the point that America is one of it's the most unique country in the world for this one reason, that we sort of stand in the middle. We're very affluent and also very religious, and so we're very much an outlier. And so I think we're not likely to go just the path of Europe. But what I think
Hmm.
is more likely to happen is that we're going to have these two different camps. So you got your heavily church and Christianized group of people who are active and entrepreneurial and engaged in the church and who understand the language and the gospel, and they're doing church very much the same way that they would have done it 50 years ago. And then you've got this other America that's very secular, that's very non-God minded, and it'll be, roughly speaking, half and half, or a third and seven tenths. And so there'll be many millions and millions of churchgoers, and we'll be able to be effective as church leaders. But the real question is, do we have the heart of evangelism,
Right.
of
Right.
not recycling Christians from
Yeah.
this, pool of activist Christians, but do we really have the heart to reach those who are outside the church over the next 10 years?